Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, you're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else, not in the media, and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Dan Proft, co-host of Chicago's Morning Answer, AM 560, weekdays, 5 to 9 a.m. with Amy Jacobson. Joining me is co-hostess Pat Hughes, Illinois Opportunity Project co-founder. And Pat, the Trump tax cuts mean more take-home pay for American families. The Heritage Foundation finding that the average taxpayer in every state and in every congressional district will see a tax cut in 2018. That's at the federal level. In states like Illinois, where we raised taxes by 32% last year, that might not be the same, except, ironically, for public sector workers. They're going to see a bump because of the Janus decision. Right? I mean,
yeah,
so
they have more take-home pay because of the Janus decision.
Yeah, so you've got the tax cuts for the public sector workers. You've got the Janus decision offering worker freedom.
I don't need to be thanked for all that money, by the way.
Yeah,
we don't need to be thanked.
Their additional disposable income is thanks enough, particularly in a state struggling like Illinois. But it's just interesting to note so that people do a little comparison shopping, and they will continue to do so in terms of where they want to live and what they think is sensible policy and not sensible policy. And it's going to be important even for Republicans in Illinois, some of whom are being targeted for elimination and could be the difference between a Republican majority in the House and a Republican minority in the House, people like Peter Roskam and Randy Hultgren in the suburbs.
Yeah, Dan, the federal economy, all the indicators obviously are extremely robust, from unemployment to how the market's been doing over all this time. GDP growth. And this has been proven historically, right? Then when more money goes back to consumers, they spend it the way that they want, and the economy grows. But the problem with that, of course, is local policy impacts how that federal policy ultimately is enumerated at the local level, and this is the problem that we have here in Illinois. Yeah,
and to put a fine point on it, the 2011 Quinn Democrat temporary income tax hike, according to the Illinois Policy Institute, cost Illinois $25 billion in gross output during the period that tax was in effect. And then, of course, the 2017 tax hike, permanent tax hike I just referenced, that's going to have a similar, if not more pronounced, deleterious effect. And there's only so much good federal policy can do to blunt the terrible policy at the state and local level here. But for more on this topic and the impact of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as it's called, the Trump tax cuts, we're pleased to be joined by Adam Michel, who's a Heritage Foundation policy analyst, one of the authors of the report that provides some of the data so that people understand what the take-home pay is, what the bumps are, and how this is going to impact their quality of life and disposable income. Adam, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So, the left, of course, infamously by Nancy Pelosi, has called the Trump tax cuts crumbs. It seems from some of the findings you have here, particularly if you project them out, where those tax cuts to stay in effect for, say, the next decade, it amounts to a little bit more than crumbs for middle-income families.
That's exactly right. Our new study measures the benefits of tax reform at the congressional district level, at the state level, and at the national level. What we find is that every congressional district, every state benefits from tax reform, both this year in a direct tax cut, and then over the next 10 years as an accumulation of those tax cuts plus some economic growth. What that looks like for Illinois is about a $1,200 tax cut this year for the average household, and that ends up being over $21,000 of increased take-home pay over the next 10 years. It's even more for families of four, just shy of $40,000 for a family of four in Illinois over the next 10 years. That's certainly not crumbs.
Adam, can you explain then, obviously that's a lot of additional income for people to spend in a discretionary manner across the entire country, including here. What does that do economically? Explain to the listeners sort of like what impact that has and why we're seeing sort of an economic effect as a result of those cuts.
Yeah, so we had both tax cuts for individuals and business tax cuts, and both sort of work together to make the economy healthier, increase the ability of businesses to hire, to create jobs, hire more people. When they're hiring more people and expanding because of a healthy economy, wages have to rise, because if you see sort of the signs going up in windows, help wanted, what that means is businesses now have to pay people more in order to entice them to take their job. And that's what we're seeing across the country, is more jobs being created. We are seeing wages start to increase for the first time in quite a while. And that's all due to more money being spent by individuals, people, and by businesses rather than Washington.
That's that last piece is something that analysts really look at. It's that a wage growth. Are we seeing real wage growth? And it's been slow the first year of Trump's administration, but it seems in the first quarter and a half this year, you've started to slowly see it creep up, which is a pretty good sign.
Yeah, and if you dig down into that data and look at some of some specific sectors, the areas of the economy where the labor market is the tightest, where they're struggling to find people to fill jobs in construction, in retail, we are seeing wage growth significantly outpace inflation. So real wage growth in these sectors is sort of telling this story that the tax cuts are benefiting people's wages, and we expect to see that play out in these other sectors sort of as the labor market continues to tighten in those places as well.
So despite what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, the low unemployment numbers and wage growth is not a result of everybody having two jobs.
No, I think they tend to factor that thing into these statistics.
Adam, how does this impact a state like Illinois or Connecticut or New York or California that are really, really high tax states across the board? And so, some of this economic wave of positive news as a result of the Trump policies and the tax cut is sort of missing us. Why is that the case, and what can be done to stem that tide?
Yeah, the local policy is also incredibly important, and local policy, Illinois, California, New York, should be following the playbook that's being implemented at the federal level. It's reform your income tax system. It's lower rates as much as possible. It's look at where we're spending money. Spend less money on frivolous things that aren't really benefiting the sort of constituents that are voting for you. Decrease regulation. Allow people to cut hair and to bake without licenses. There's all sorts of things you can do to sort of free the economy and allow individuals to make decisions that best suit them rather than having to ask the government for permission.
And we're seeing this play out within the 50 laboratories of democracy, aren't we, where you see population migration to low-tax states like Florida, like South Carolina, like Texas, like Tennessee.
That's exactly right. I mean, I grew up in California, and people are leaving in droves for Texas. Texas is actually advertising in California. Come to Texas, where we don't tax you as much, where you don't have to interact with the government on a daily basis, where the quality of life is just better, and we are seeing that across the country that true free market, limited government policies are what increase people's ability to live their life the way they want to, and ultimately materializes in people being happier and wealthier in the long run.
Yeah, and I think some of these, blue states have always sort of kept their populace because there's these giant population centers and sort of these classic world cities like San Francisco or like Chicago or like New York. But now I have a friend just left Connecticut, outside of Manhattan, Connecticut, to come to Indiana, and he'll never go back because once you commit to the idea that there are other places in the world, I think we're going to see that more and more and more unless these states with these great cities start impacting their citizenry better with better policies.
And you'll see younger people like myself not move into these big cities. I mean, I have friends that are from Chicago. They would love to move back there, but they see the impending pension crisis, and they see the high taxes, and they say, no, thank you. I'll look for a job elsewhere.
He is Adam Michel, Heritage Policy Analyst, one of the authors of the report on the impact state by state and in real dollars of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Those are the Trump tax cuts. Adam, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.